In a dusty Texas town, a man doesn't see a runaway heiress. He sees a person worthy of respect, trust, and love. Elias Thorne teaches Lottie that partnership is not about possession, but equality. But with Cornelius Vance hunting her, will Lottie survive both the land and the man who claims to control her life? This story reminds us that true love uplifts rather than confines, and that respect is the ultimate gift we can give one another. If this story touched your heart, like, comment, and share.
The silk dress weighed 20 pounds. It felt like 100. Charlotte Montgomery stood perfectly still in front of her floor-to-length mirror. Silver threads caught the gaslight in her Manhattan bedroom. It was September 1878. Tomorrow night, she was going to be sold. They didn't call it a sale, of course. They called it a formal engagement. But Charlotte knew the truth. Downstairs, the heavy oak doors of her father's study were closed, but not entirely. Charlotte crept out of her room, her bare feet silent on the thick Persian rug. She paused at the top of the grand staircase. Ice clinked against crystal. Then, a voice, smooth, cold. It belonged to Cornelius Vance, 54 years old, with eyes like unpolished silver coins. "Don't look so grim, Arthur," Cornelius said, his voice drifting up the stairs. "The girl will learn her place. Let's not pretend this is about romance. Women are simply assets attached to land deeds, nothing more. You sign the railroad contracts tomorrow, the girl comes with the property, and your debts are erased. It is business." Charlotte waited for her father to speak, to argue, to say she was his daughter, not a parcel of land. Silence. Only the sound of liquor being poured. Her father had sold her out. Charlotte didn't cry. The tears simply weren't there anymore. Instead, a hot, bright anger started in her chest. It moved up her throat. It tasted like copper. She walked back to her bedroom. She closed the door. She locked it. She stood before the mirror again. She looked at the expensive, suffocating corset. She looked at the elaborate, heavy curls pinned perfectly to her head. It wasn't her. It was a doll. A very expensive, very trapped doll. She walked over to her sewing table, her fingers wrapped around the cold iron handles of her dressmaking shears. She stepped back in front of the mirror. She grabbed a thick handful of her long, pampered, dark hair. She opened the shears. Snip. The hair hit the floor. She grabbed another handful. Snip. Another. Snip. She didn't stop until the hair was hacked short. Brushing against her bare shoulders, her chest heaved. The room was perfectly quiet, but her mind was roaring. She looked at the woman in the glass. For the first time in 28 years, she recognized the eyes staring back. She needed to hear it. She needed to make it real. Charlotte leaned close to the mirror. Her breath fogged the glass. She spoke out loud, her voice trembling at first, then hardening into steel. "I am not an asset," she said to the empty room. "I am a human being of flesh and blood. I have a right to my own freedom and my own dignity. I refuse to be a commodity traded across a gentleman's negotiating table. My life belongs to me." The words hung in the air, spoken, alive. They couldn't be taken back. She moved fast now, no hesitation. She unlaced the terrible, suffocating silk gown. She let it drop to the floor. It pooled around her ankles like a dead thing. She opened the bottom drawer of her wardrobe. Hidden in the back was a plain, rough-spun cotton dress. She had taken it from the laundry room 3 days ago. Just a maid's dress. Gray. Simple. Cheap. She put it on. It was loose. It was light. She could actually breathe. She found her small velvet coin purse. Inside there was $12 in petty cash. It was nothing to a Montgomery. But to a woman stepping into the dark, it was everything. She stuffed the bills into her pocket. She grabbed a small satchel. threw in a change of undergarments and a pair of sturdy walking boots. She opened her window. The autumn wind hit her face. It smelled of coal smoke, horses, and the distant, salty Atlantic Ocean. She slipped down the servants' staircase, out the kitchen door, into the alleyway. She didn't look back at the mansion, not once. 2 hours later, she was sitting on a hard wooden bench in the third-class car of a westbound train. The whistle blew, a long, lonely sound in the dark. The engine lurched forward. A conductor walked down the aisle, punching tickets. He stopped at her row. He looked at her chopped hair, her plain gray dress. "Ticket, miss," he said. "Name?" She looked out the window. The bright, gaslit streets of New York were fading. The dark, open country was waiting. "Carter," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "Lottie Mae Carter." The conductor nodded, punched her ticket, and moved on. Charlotte Montgomery was dead. Lottie Mae Carter closed her eyes, leaned her head against the rattling window, and rode into the dark. She was terrified. She was completely alone. And for the first time in her life, she was free. The Texas sun was a physical weight. It pushed down on her shoulders. It burned through the thin cotton of her gray dress. 1,400 miles. That was how far she had run. Lottie Mae Carter stood at the edge of the dirt road. The stagecoach rattled away, leaving behind a cloud of red dust. The dust settled on her boots. It tasted like dry earth and distance. She looked up. A wooden sign swung on a post overhead, Ironwood Ranch. The land stretched out forever, flat, hard, beautiful in a terrifying way. There were no mansions here, no paved roads, no gex lights. Just endless acres of yellow grass, a massive red sandstone main house, and a sprawling network of barns and corrals. She took a breath, her lungs filled with the smell of cattle, dry wind, and pine. She started walking. She reached the back porch of the main house. A woman stood there, older. Gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, an apron covered in flour. She had kind eyes, but a mouth that looked like it didn't tolerate fools. This was Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper. "Can I help you?" Mrs. Higgins asked. Her voice was sharp. "I'm looking for work," Lottie said. "I heard you needed a maid." Mrs. Higgins wiped her hands on a rag. She looked Lottie up and down. She looked at her chopped, uneven hair. She looked at her clean, smooth hands. "You're from the East," Mrs. Higgins said. "Not a question. A fact." "Yes, ma'am. Ohio." It was the lie she had practiced on the train. "You don't look like you've ever scrubbed a floor in your life, girl." Lottie swallowed hard. "I learn fast. And I work hard." Before Mrs. Higgins could answer, a man walked around the corner of the house. He didn't walk. He stalked, like a predator that wasn't in a hurry. He wore faded denim, leather chaps, and a work shirt rolled up to his elbows. A layer of dust coated him. He smelled of horse sweat and leather. This was Elias Thorne. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He pushed his hat back with a gloved thumb. He had eyes the color of dark coffee, sharp, unblinking. He looked at Lottie, really looked at her. He saw the posture. A woman raised to balance books on her head. He saw the skin, pale, untouched by the sun. He saw the hands, soft, manicured, completely devoid of calluses. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. "This is Lottie, Mr. Thorne," Mrs. Higgins said. "Says she's from Ohio. Wants the maid position." Elias stayed quiet for a long moment. The wind blew. A horse whinnied in the distance. "Let her start today," Elias said. His voice was a low rumble. Mrs. Higgins frowned. "Are you sure?" "She looks like a stiff breeze would knock her over." "I'm sure," Elias said. He tipped his hat to Lottie, just a fraction of an inch. Then he turned and walked toward the barn. That night, the ranch was quiet. Elias sat at the heavy oak desk in his study. A single oil lamp burned. A glass of whiskey sat untouched near his right hand. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. He pulled out a stack of newspapers. He liked to read the Eastern papers. Kept him grounded. Reminded him why he left that world behind. He opened the New York Tribune. It was dated 2 weeks ago. Page 4. A small column near the bottom. Missing. Charlotte Montgomery disappeared the night before her formal engagement to Cornelius Vance. Reward offered. Below the text was a small, sketched portrait. Elias stared at the sketch. He looked at the long, curled hair, the expensive jewels around the neck, the haughty tilt of the chin. Then he looked past all that. He looked at the eyes. It was the girl in the kitchen. Elias leaned back in his chair. The wood creaked. He took a sip of the whiskey. It burned his throat. Good. He needed something real to anchor him. He knew exactly who Cornelius Vance was. A vulture in a silk suit. A man who bought land out from under desperate farmers. A man who would marry a girl just to swallow her family's wealth. Elias looked back at the paper. He should send a telegram. It was the law. It was the proper thing to do. He thought about the way the girl had stood on his porch, terrified, shaking like a wet leaf, but her chin was up. She hadn't backed down from Mrs. Higgins. She was running for her life. Elias slowly folded the newspaper. He put it back in the drawer. He turned the key. Click. He wasn't going to send a telegram. He was going to play along. The next morning, skies was purple and bruised with dawn. Elias found Lottie on the back porch. She was struggling to carry a heavy wooden bucket of water from the pump. Water sloshed over the sides, soaking her boots. He walked over. He didn't take the bucket from her. He let her carry it. She set it down, panting. She wiped sweat from her forehead. "Morning, Mr. Thorne," she said. Elias stood tall over her. He looked her right in the eye. It was time to set the rules. Not the rules of the house, the rules of life. "Listen to me, Lottie," Elias said. His voice was steady. Serious. I don't care where you came from. I don't care what you left behind. Down here in Texas, your birthright or your last name doesn't mean a damn thing. A fancy dress won't pull a calf out of the mud. Money won't make the rain fall. Lottie stared at him. Her breathing slowed. She listened. Elias pointed a finger at the dirt beneath their boots. Measure person's worth by the sweat they pour into the dirt and the honest truth in their words. No one here is above the work. No one is below it. If you're willing to labor, you stand equal to every man on this ranch. Do you understand? It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Lottie felt a strange heat rise in her chest. Not anger, pride. She had never been spoken to like this, like a real, capable human being. "I understand," she said. "Good," Elias said. "Breakfast is at 6. Don't be late." He walked away. Lottie looked at the heavy bucket of water. She picked it up again. It felt a little lighter this time. The rooster crowed at 4:30. Lottie bolted awake. It was pitch black. Her room was tiny. 4 wooden walls, a narrow cot, a single wool blanket. It was cold. Her whole body ached. Her shoulders screamed. Her legs felt like lead. She'd been at Ironwood for 5 days. 5 days of hell. She dragged herself out of bed. She pulled on her boots. They were stiff and coated in dried mud. By 5 o'clock, she was in the kitchen. The cast iron stove was a monster. It sat in the corner, cold and black. Lottie hated the stove. She grabbed a handful of kindling. She struck a match. The flame flared. She shoved it into the wood. The wood hissed. Smoke billowed out, thick and gray. It hit her right in the face. She coughed. Her eyes watered. The fire died. She tried again. More smoke. More coughing. "You have to open the flue, girl." Lottie spun around. Mrs. Higgins stood in the doorway. She walked over, reached past Lottie, and pulled a small metal lever on the stovepipe. "Fire needs air to breathe. Just like us, Mrs. Higgins said. She didn't sound angry, just tired. Lottie struck a third match. This time, the fire caught. The wood popped and crackled. Heat washed over her face. Small victories. The day only got harder. By noon, she was out by the washboards. The Texas sun was merciless. Lottie stood over a large wooden tub. The water was boiling hot. The soap was made of lye. She scrubbed a pair of heavy denim work pants, up up and down against the metal ridges of the washboard. The lye soap was brutal. It stripped the oils from her skin. Her knuckles were raw. Blisters formed on the palms of her hands. A few of them had already popped, leaving angry, stinging red flesh. She stopped for a second. She lifted her hands out of the soapy water. She looked at them. 2 weeks ago, these hands played Mozart on an ivory piano. They wore silk gloves. They held crystal champagne flutes. Now, they were red, cracked, and bleeding. She bit her lip. She wanted to cry. She wanted to lay down in the dirt and sleep for a week. But she remembered the mirror in New York. She remembered the cage. She plunged her hands back into the water. She kept scrubbing. From the shadow of the barn, Elias watched her. He saw the way she winced every time her hands hit the washboard. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw. She didn't quit. She didn't complain. She just kept going. He turned and walked into the tack room. He dug through a wooden chest until he found what he was looking for. A small tin of badger fat and beeswax. Good for horse sores. Good for blistered hands. He walked out to the water pump. He set the tin on the edge of the wooden trough, right where she would find it when she came to rinse the clothes. He didn't say a word. He just walked away. Later that afternoon, Lottie found the tin. She rubbed the cooling salve into her cracked skin. The pain faded. She looked around the yard. No one was there. But she knew. She just knew. The breaking point came on Sunday morning. Mrs. Higgins had gone to town to buy supplies. She left Lottie in charge of breakfast. 10 hungry cowboys were coming in from the range in an hour. Lottie was making biscuits. She had watched Mrs. Higgins do it a dozen times. Flour, lard, salt, milk, mix it up, bake it. It looked simple. It wasn't. Lottie's hands were covered in sticky dough. There was flour on her nose, flour in her hair. She shoved the heavy iron pan into the oven. Then she turned to fry the bacon. The bacon grease popped. It hit her arm. She jumped back. She dropped the spatula. She scrambled to pick it up. The coffee boiled over on the top of the stove, hissing and smelling like burnt mud. Then she smelled it. The smoke. The biscuits. Lottie grabbed a rag. She threw open the oven door. A cloud of black smoke rolled out. She pulled the iron pan out and dropped it on the heavy wooden table. They black, hard as rocks, completely ruined. Lottie stared at the blackened lumps of dough. Something inside her snapped. The exhaustion, the fear, the pain in her hands, the terror that Cornelius Vance was out there, somewhere, looking for her. It all came rushing up at once. She sank into a wooden chair. She buried her face in her hands. She began to cry. Not delicate, pretty tears. Ugly, gasping, shoulder-shaking sobs. She was useless. She was just a spoiled heir playing dress-up. She couldn't even feed a crew of working men. Boot steps sounded on the wooden porch. Heavy. Slow. Elias walked into the kitchen. The room was full of smoke. It smelled like burnt flour and ruined coffee. And in the middle of it all, Lottie was crying at the table. Elias didn't yell. He took off his hat and set it on the counter. He walked over to the stove and pulled the burning coffee pot off the heat. He opened a window to let the smoke out. Then he walked over to the table. He sat that down opposite her. Lottie wiped her eyes with the back of her flour-covered hand. She couldn't look at him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her voice shook. I ruined breakfast. I'm completely useless. Elias looked at the black biscuits. He reached out with a calloused hand. He picked one up. It was heavy. It felt like a brick. He brought it to his mouth. He took a bite. It cracked loudly. He chewed. It tasted like ash and salt. He swallowed it down. Lottie stared at him, her eyes wide. "What are you doing? You'll break your teeth. It's ruined." Elias set the biscuit down. He leaned his forearms on the table. He looked her dead in the eyes. "Listen to me," Elias said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "Respect isn't reserved for those born perfect, Lottie. Respect belongs to the person who admits they failed and tries again." Lottie sniffled. "But I can't do anything right. I wasn't raised to do anything real." "That's a lie they told you," Elias said firmly. "They taught you to sit still and look pretty because that made you easy to control. They didn't want you to know how strong you are." He reached across the table. He didn't touch her, but he pointed at her raw, blistered hands. "Look at your hands," Elias commanded. Lottie looked down at her red, damaged skin. "Those are the hands of a worker," Elias said. Every word was deliberate. Every word carried weight. Calloused hands don't degrade you. Manual labor doesn't make you lower than anyone else. It gives you back the power to own your own survival. A woman who can build a fire and bake bread doesn't need a man to keep her alive. She is her own master. Lottie sat perfectly still. The tears stopped falling. Elias's words settled into her bones. They weren't just words. They were a key unlocking the final door of her cage. "Now," Elias said, standing up, "throw those rocks out for the chicken. Wash your face. Then get out the flour. We're going to try again. Together." Lottie looked up at the tall, dusty cowboy. She nodded. She stood up. She grabbed the pan of burnt biscuits. She walked out the back door. She threw them into the yard. The chickens scattered, then ran back to peck at the charred dough. Lottie walked back inside. She rolled up her sleeves. She reached into the flour bin. She wasn't a runaway heiress anymore. She was a woman learning how to survive, and she was going to bake some damn biscuits. The air in the Manhattan office was thick. Cigar smoke hung near the painted ceiling. It smelled like expensive tobacco and cold ambition. Cornelius Vance did not like to wait. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk. He tapped a gold pocket watch against the wood. Tick, tick, tick. The door opened. A man walked in. He didn't look like New York. He wore a rumpled suit. His boots were scuffed. He had the lean, hungry look of a hound dog. This was Silas Thorne, private detective, based out of Dallas, Texas. "You're late," Cornelius said. "Trains run on coal, Mr. Vance." "Not on your schedule," Silas replied. He didn't take off his hat. He just stood there, unimpressed. Cornelius narrowed his eyes. He opened a leather folder. He pushed a photograph across the desk. It was a portrait of Charlotte Montgomery. "She has been missing for a month," Cornelius said. "Her father is useless. The local police are incompetent. I need someone who knows the Western Territories. I have reason to believe she took a train past the Mississippi." Silas picked up the photograph. He studied it. "Pretty girl. Why did she run?" "That is," Cornelius snapped. "She is my fiancée. Our marriage is tied to several highly sensitive land contracts. Without her signature, the deals stall. She is a vital asset." Silas looked up from the picture. "You talk about her like she's a missing horse." "A horse would be easier to replace," Cornelius said coldly. "Find her, discreetly. Bring her back to New York. I will pay you $500. $500. It was a staggering amount of money. Silas put the photograph in his coat pocket. "I'll find her," Silas said. He turned and walked out. Cornelius leaned back in his leather chair. He struck a match. He lit another cigar. The hunt was on. A 1,000 miles away, the Texas sky was turning violet. Lottie stood on the back porch of Ironwood Ranch. She held a basket of dried laundry against her hip. She breathed in the cool evening air. It had been 4 weeks. 4 weeks of blisters, burns, and aching bones. But something was changing. Her hands were no longer soft. They were rough. They had calluses. She didn't drop the iron skillets anymore. She didn't burn the biscuits. She could carry 2 buckets of water without stopping to catch her breath. She felt solid, grounded, real. She set the laundry basket down. She walked out into the open yard. The sun dipped below the horizon. The sky erupted in stars, millions of them, a sweeping, glittering river of light across the black canvas. You couldn't see stars like this in New York. The gaslights and the coal could choke them out. They look different out here, don't they? Lottie jumped. She spun around. Elias was leaning against the wooden corral fence. He was just a shadow in the dusk. The red ember of a hand-rolled cigarette glowed in the dark. "You scared me," Lottie said, her hand on her chest. Elias stepped away from the fence. He walked toward her. His boots crunched softly on the dry dirt. He stopped a few feet away. He looked up at the sky. "City folks always stare straight ahead," Elias said, "looking for the next building, the next street lamp. Out here, you have to look up. It's the only way to know where you are." Lottie looked up. "It's beautiful, but it's overwhelming. How do you make sense of it all?" Elias raised a hand. He pointed toward the northern horizon. "You find the anchors," he said. His voice was low, rhythmic. "See that cluster? Looks like a ladle. That's the Big Dipper. Follow the edge of the cup straight up. That bright one right there. That's the North Star." Lottie followed his finger. She found the star. Bright, steady, unblinking. "If you ever get lost in the dark," Elias said, "you find that star. It doesn't move. It doesn't care about the wind or the rain. It just stays true. You keep it on your right shoulder, and you'll walk straight west." Lottie stared at the star. A lump formed in her throat. She turned her head. She looked at Elias. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, the deep lines around his eyes. He was a hard man, but there was a profound, quiet gentleness to him. He knew she was lying. She felt it in her bones. He knew she wasn't a poor orphan from Ohio. Yet he never pushed. He never trapped her in a corner. "Elias," she said softly. It was the first time she used his first name. He looked down at her. His dark eyes locked onto hers. "Yeah? Why don't you ever ask me?" Lottie's voice trembled slightly. "You know I don't belong here. You know my hands were too soft. You know I don't talk like a country girl. Why don't you interrogate me? Why don't you demand to know where I really came from?" The wind blew across the yard. It rustled the dry grass. Elias didn't answer right away. He dropped his cigarette. He crushed it under the heel of his boot. He looked at her with an expression so open. It made her breath catch. Because forcing someone to reveal a secret before they're ready is an act of theft, Elias said. He took a step closer. The space between them crackled. "Listen to me, Lottie," he said, his voice steady and fiercely clear. "Every person has the right to own their own story. The world takes enough from us. It takes our sweat, our time, sometimes our blood. Your past is your property. I choose to give you time, because true compassion must always be paired with the respect of boundaries. I will never drag a confession out of you. You'll tell me when you're ready, or you won't, and you'll still have a place here either way." Lottie stared at him. The tears welled up hot and fast. No one had ever respected her boundaries. In New York, her life was an open book for society to read, critique, and trade. Here, in the middle of nowhere, a cowboy was giving her the greatest gift she had ever received. She didn't speak. She couldn't. She just reached out and placed her rough, calloused hand on his arm. Elias looked down at her hand. He covered it with his own. His thumbs brushed over her knuckles. "It's getting cold," he said softly. "Go inside. The stars will be here tomorrow." Lottie nodded. She turned and walked back to the house. She looked over her shoulder one last time. Elias was still standing there, watching the North Star, watching over her. The kitchen was quiet. It was the best time of day. Dinner was over. The cowboys were in the bunkhouse. The heavy iron pots were scrubbed and drying on the rack. The fire in the stove was reduced to a warm, glowing ember. Lottie wiped down the long wooden table. She was tired, but it was a good tired, the kind that let you sleep deeply. She fell into a rhythm. Wipe the wood, rinse the cloth, wring it out. Repeat. Her mind wandered. She was safe. The tension in her shoulders was gone. Without thinking, a melody slipped past her lips. It was an old tune, gentle, haunting, a lullaby she hadn't heard in 20 years. "Lay down your head, my little wild bird. Storm is passing, the wind is heard." She hummed it softly. Then she sang the next line. "But safe in the nest, the feathers stay warm. I'll keep you safe from the cold and the storm." Crash! Lottie spun around. Mrs. Higgins stood in the doorway of the pantry. A ceramic plate lay shattered on the floor at her feet. She wasn't looking at the broken pieces. She was staring straight at Lottie. The older woman's face was chalk white. Her hands were shaking. "Where did you hear that song?" Mrs. Higgins asked. Her voice was a cracked whisper. Lottie froze. The rag dripped water onto the floor. I don't know. My mother sang it a long time ago." "Don't lie to me," Mrs. Higgins said. She took a step forward. Her eyes were wide, searching Lottie's face, frantically looking for something hidden. "That is an old County Clare lullaby. I made up the English words myself. Nobody else knows it. Nobody." Lottie's heart hammered against her ribs. She took a step back. "I'm sorry. I must have misremembered Charlotte." The name hit the air like a gunshot. Nobody had called her that in a month. Lottie stopped breathing. She stared at the housekeeper. Mrs. Higgins walked closer. She reached out with trembling hands. She pushed a lock of Lottie's chopped hair behind her ear. She looked at the shape of her eyes, the slope of her cheek. "Lord in heaven," Mrs. Higgins choked out. Tears spilled over her wrinkled cheeks. "It's you, little Lottie? You're my Charlotte." The memory slammed into Lottie's mind. The smell of lavender soap, warm oatmeal with brown sugar, a soft voice reading stories by the fire, a woman who was suddenly, violently gone when Charlotte was 8 years old. "Beatrice?" Lottie whispered. "Yes." "Oh, yes, child." Beatrice threw her arms around Lottie. She pulled her tight against her chest. Lottie closed her eyes. The scent of lavender was still there, hiding beneath the flour and wood smoke. She hugged the older woman back, burying her face in Beatrice's shoulder. They stood there in the warm kitchen, surrounded by broken ceramic, holding each other and crying. Finally, Beatrice pulled back. She wiped her face with her apron. She pulled Lottie toward the small wooden chairs by the stove. They sat down. Beatrice kept holding Lottie's hands. "What happened?" Lottie asked, her voice thick. "When I was 8, Father told me you went back to Ireland. He said you got tired of being a nanny." Beatrice let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Tired? I loved you like my own flesh and blood. I never would have left you." "Then why?" Beatrice looked down at their joined hands. The anger mixed with an old, deep sorrow in her eyes. "Your father's new associates were coming around," Beatrice said, "and his kind. They didn't like how I was raising you. I was teaching you to read philosophy. I was teaching you to speak your mind. Mr. Vance told your father that I was ruining his future investment." Lottie felt sick. Even at 8 years old, she was just property being groomed. They fired me, Beatrice continued. No warning, no severance. They threw my bags into the street in the pouring rain. I begged them to let me say goodbye to you. I got on my knees in the mud, Charlotte. Your father just closed the heavy oak door in my face. Beatrice squeezed Lottie's rough, calloused hands. She looked fiercely into Lottie's eyes. It was time to say the truth out loud. They threw me out like a sick dog, Beatrice said, her voice ringing with hard-earned wisdom. They severed the motherly love I had for you just because I was the hired help. They thought they owned my heart because they paid my wages. Lottie listened, her chest tight. Society turned its back on us, Charlotte, Beatrice declared, the words cutting through the quiet kitchen. The wealthy think they have a monopoly on humanity, but pain doesn't care if you wear silk or homespun cotton. Our blood is the same red. Our tears are the same salt. The class divide is an arrogant illusion. Beatrice reached up and cupped Lottie's cheek. When I saw your picture in the paper a few weeks ago, my heart stopped, Beatrice said. I didn't recognize you here, the chopped hair, the dirt. But I knew you were running. You were right to run, my brave girl. You have to live for yourself. Never let them put you back in that cage. Lottie leaned into the touch. You saw the paper? Does Elias know? Beatrice smiled, a sad, gentle smile. Mr. Thorne? Child? Mr. Thorne knows everything that happens on this land. He keeps the Eastern papers in his locked drawer. Lottie's breath hitched. He knows? Elias knows who I am? He does. Why didn't he say anything? Why did he make me scrub floors and haul water if he knew I was an heiress? Beatrice looked toward the window, out toward the dark shapes of the barns. Because Elias Thorne knows what it means to lose everything, Beatrice said softly. 5 years ago, there was a cholera outbreak. It swept through the county. Elias had a wife, Sarah, sweetest girl you ever met. They had been married 2 years. She was carrying his child. Lottie felt a cold chill run down her spine. Oh no, she died in his arms, Beatrice said. He couldn't buy her way out of it. Death is the great equalizer. It broke him. He disappeared for a year. When he came back, he bought this land. He built Ironwood. He built it to be a fair place, a place where nobody is judged by their past, only by their present. Beatrice looked back at Lottie. He didn't make you scrub floors to punish you, Charlotte. He gave you chores because he knew you needed to build yourself back up from the ground. He gave you the one thing your father never did. Lottie looked at her calloused hands. The truth settled into her heart, profound and undeniable. He gave me respect, Lottie whispered. Yes, Beatrice said. And now that you know, you have a choice to make. You can keep playing the maid from Ohio, or you can stand up, walk into his office, and own who you really are. Lottie looked toward the hallway. The light was still on under Elias's study door. She took a deep breath. She stood up. I'm done hiding, Lottie said. She let go of Beatrice's hands. She walked out of the kitchen. She marched down the hall. Every step felt heavier, but also lighter. She was terrified, but she was finally walking on her own 2 feet. The hallway was quiet, the kind of quiet that rings in your ears. Lottie stood alone in the dark corridor. Behind her, the kitchen was still warm. Ahead of her was the heavy oak door of Elias Thorne's study. A thin line of yellow light bled out from underneath it. She stared at that line of light. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was a steady, heavy beat. She thought about Beatrice in the kitchen. She thought about the tears, the memories, the scent of lavender. The truth was out. At least, part of it was. Beatrice knew she was Charlotte Montgomery. But Elias knew, too. That was the thought that made her hands shake. He knew. He had known for a month. Lottie looked down at her hands. She rubbed her thumbs over the rough calluses on her palms. She remembered the lye soap. She remembered the heavy buckets of water. She remembered the blister salve she had found by the pump. He didn't make her work to punish her. He made her work to build her. She took a deep breath. The air smelled of wood polish and old dust. She stepped forward. She raised her hand. Her knuckles rapped against the thick wood. Knock. Come in, a voice said. Low, steady. Lottie turned the brass knob. The door swung open on oiled hinges. The study was warm. A fire burned low in the stone hearth. The walls were lined with bookshelves, leather bindings, thick ledgers. A map of the Texas territory hung behind the desk. Elias sat at the massive desk. He wore a white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. A ledger lay open in front of him. A pencil was gripped in his hand. He looked up. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look angry. He just looked at her. Lottie, Elias said. He set the pencil down. He leaned back in his leather chair. The chair creaked in the quiet room. Everything all right in the kitchen? Lottie closed the door behind her. It shut with a solid click. The kitchen is fine, she said. Her voice was surprisingly steady. She walked toward the center of the room. She stopped a few feet from his desk. The oil lamp on his desk cast a warm, golden glow over his face. It highlighted the deep lines around his eyes. I didn't come to talk about the kitchen, Lottie said. Elias watched her. His dark eyes gave nothing away. All right, take a seat. I prefer to stand. Elias gave a slow, barely perceptible nod. He folded his hands and rested them on the open ledger. He waited. He was a man who knew how to wait. A man who understood silence. Lottie swallowed hard. The words felt like stones in her throat. She had practiced this 100 times on the short walk down the hall. Now the words scattered like dry leaves in the wind. She looked at him. She looked at the man who had taught her to read the stars. The man who had eaten her burnt biscuits without a single word of complaint. She had to do this. She had to strip away the lie. My name is not Lottie Mae Carter, she said. The words hung in the air. She didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. His expression didn't change by a fraction of an inch. He just kept looking at her. I am not an orphan from Ohio, Lottie continued. Her voice rose a little, gaining strength. I have never been to Ohio. I didn't come here looking for an honest wage. I came here because I was running. Still, nothing from Elias. Just that steady, dark gaze. Lottie gripped the fabric of her apron. My real name is Charlotte Montgomery. I am the only daughter of Arthur Montgomery. He is an industrialist in New York. A month ago, I ran away on the eve of my engagement to a man named Cornelius Vance, a man I despise, a man who only wanted my family's land. She stopped. She was breathing hard now. The confession was out. The cage was broken open. She waited for the shock. She waited for him to demand answers. She waited for him to tell her to pack her bags and get off his property. Elias sat in the silence for a long moment. Then he shifted. He didn't yell. He didn't stand up. He calmly reached down to the bottom drawer of his desk. He pulled a small brass key from his vest pocket. He slid the key into the lock. Click. He pulled the heavy drawer open. He reached inside. He pulled out a folded newspaper. He laid it flat on the desk. He pushed it across the smooth wood. It stopped right at the edge, inches from Lottie's hands. Lottie looked down. It was the New York Tribune. The date was exactly 4 weeks ago. There, near the bottom of page 4, was a sketch. It was her face. Her hair was piled high in elegant curls. A string of pearls rested against her collarbone. Above the sketch, bold black letters spelled out her true name, missing, Harris Charlotte Montgomery. Lottie stared at the paper. The air left her lungs. The room suddenly felt very small. She looked from the paper to Elias. He was watching her. He didn't look triumphant. He didn't look smug. He just looked patient. "You knew," Lottie whispered. "I knew," Elias said. His voice was calm. "When?" "The night you arrived," Elias said. He tapped the paper with his index finger. "I read the Eastern papers. Keeps me informed on cattle prices. I saw the sketch. I recognized the eyes. They were the same eyes that stared me down on my back porch." Lottie took a step back. Her mind was spinning. He knew. He knew from the very first day. "You knew," she repeated, her voice rising. Shock was fading. Something else was taking its place. A hot, bright spark of anger. "You knew who I was, and you put me in the laundry tub. You made me scrub your floors. You watched me burn my hands on that cursed stove." Elias sat perfectly still. He didn't deny it. "I did." Lottie felt her face flush. Her hands balled into fists. She felt like a fool. A complete, absolute fool. She had been playing a desperate game of survival, and he had been sitting in the audience, watching the show. "Was this a joke to you?" Lottie demanded. Her voice shook with hurt. "Was it amusing? Watching the spoiled little rich girl play in the dirt, watching her struggle to lift a bucket of water? Did you and the men laugh about it behind my back?" Elias' jaw tightened. The calmness shattered. He stood up. He moved fast. He pushed his chair back. He rounded the heavy oak desk. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. Lottie instinctively stepped back, but she didn't run. She held her ground. She tilted her chin up and glared at him. Elias stopped a foot away. He looked down at her. He wasn't angry, but he was fiercely intense. The air around him practically vibrated. "Don't you ever say that," Elias said. His voice was low. It commanded the room. "Don't you ever insult my respect for you by calling it a joke." Lottie crossed her arms. "Then explain it, because right now I feel like I've been mocked for a solid month." Elias looked at her crossed arms. He looked at her defensive posture. He shook his head slowly. "I didn't play along to mock you," Elias said. The words were deliberate, heavy. "If I had pulled out this newspaper on day 1, what would have happened, Charlotte?" He used her real name. It sent a shiver down her spine. I would have left," Lottie stammered. "Exactly," Elias said. He took a step closer. "If I had exposed you on day 1, you would have just been a frightened heiress. A runaway girl waiting for the law or a bounty hunter to drag her back to a gilded cage. You would have been terrified. You would have been powerless." Lottie stared at him. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Elias raised his hand. He gently took hold of her wrist. He didn't grip it hard, just enough to uncross her arms. He turned her hand over. He looked at her palm. "Look at this," Elias said, his thumb grazing her callous skin. Lottie looked at her hand. "By letting you work as a maid," Elias continued, his voice dropping into a rough, rhythmic cadence, "I wanted you to prove to yourself how damn strong you really are. I wanted you to know that you don't need a father's bank account to survive. You don't need a husband's permission to eat." He looked up from her hand. He met her eyes. His gaze was burning. "Listen to me," Elias said. The educational weight of his words filled the small study. He spoke them as absolute truths. True independence isn't just running away. It is knowing you can stand on your own 2 feet when the running stops. A woman's worth isn't in her dowry. It's in her resilience. I let you haul water and chop wood because labor is the great equalizer. It strips away the lies society tells you about being weak. Lottie's breath hitched. The anger in her chest vanished. It evaporated into thin air. He hadn't been laughing at her. He had been arming her. Elias didn't let go of her hand. His fingers were warm and rough against her skin. "The men in New York wanted to own you," Elias said softly. "They wanted to put you in a display case. But true love isn't locking a bird in a safe glass cage. It's teaching her how to beat her own wings so she can fly." Lottie stared at him. The words echoed in her mind. True love. Did he just say that? She looked at the hard, stoic cowboy. He wasn't hiding behind his desk anymore. He was standing right in front of her, baring his soul, offering her a kind of love she had never read about in any book. A love rooted in profound, unwavering equality. Tears prickled the corners of Lottie's eyes. Not tears of anger, tears of overwhelming relief. She had spent her whole life surrounded by people who told her what to do, how to sit, how to speak, who to marry. Elias Thorne was the first man who had ever simply handed her the reins and trusted her to ride. "You knew," Lottie whispered again, but this time it sounded like a prayer. "I knew," Elias repeated gently. "And you let me stay. I would have let you stay forever." Lottie didn't think about propriety. She didn't think about the rules of society, or the dust on his shirt, or the flour on her apron. She stepped forward. She wrapped her arms around his waist. She pressed her face into the solid warmth of his chest. Elias went completely still for a second. Then, slowly, heavily, his arms came up. He wrapped them around her shoulders. He pulled her close. He rested his chin on the top of her chopped hair. He held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Not fragile, not delicate, just precious. They stood there in the quiet study. The fire crackled in the hearth. The clock ticked on the mantel. Lottie closed her eyes. She listened to the steady beating of his heart beneath the cotton shirt. She smelled leather, tobacco, and clean sweat. The veil was gone. The lies were dead. The game was over. "Elias," Lottie said, her voice muffled against his chest. "Yeah? I burnt the biscuits again this morning. Not as bad as last time, but they were tough." Elias let out a low, rumbling laugh. It vibrated against her cheek. It was a beautiful sound. "I know," he said, rubbing a hand up and down her back. "I ate 3 of them." Lottie smiled in the dark. She wasn't a runaway anymore. She had stopped running. She had finally found a place where her feet touched solid ground. She had found a man who didn't want to conquer her. A man who simply wanted to stand there beside her. She held him a little tighter. Tomorrow the sun would rise over Ironwood Ranch. Tomorrow there would be floors to scrub and wood to chop. Tomorrow the past might finally come knocking at their door. But tonight she was safe. Tonight she was strong. Tonight she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The town of Caldwell was little more than a dusty scar on the Texas plains. It had one main street, a bank, a mercantile, and a saloon called the Brass Ring. It smelled of stale beer, horse sweat, and hot pine. Silas Thorne pushed through the swinging doors of the saloon. He didn't look like a rich man. His coat was covered in trail dust. His boots were scuffed, but his eyes were sharp. They took in the room in a single, sweeping glance. He noted the exits. He noted the men playing cards in the corner. He noted the bartender wiping down the scratched mahogany counter. Silas walked to the bar. He dropped a silver dime on the wood. "Whiskey," he said. The bartender poured a glass of amber liquid. Silas didn't drink it right away. He reached into his inside coat pocket. He pulled out a piece of paper. He unfolded it and smoothed it flat on the bar. It was a sketch. A girl with dark hair, a haughty chin, and a string of pearls. "I'm looking for someone," Silas said. The bartender squinted at the paper. He wiped his hands on his apron. "Lots of folks come through Caldwell looking to get lost, mister." "She isn't lost," Silas said flatly. "She's hiding. Brown hair, soft hands." Talks like she swallowed a dictionary. Probably came off the eastbound train about a month ago. Might be passing herself off as a maid or a cook. At the far end of the bar, a young cowboy froze. His name was Tommy. He was 19 years old. He worked for Ironwood Ranch. He had come to town for a bag of coffee beans and a box of horseshoe nails. Tommy stared into his sarsaparilla. He didn't turn around. He didn't breathe. He knew exactly who the man was talking about. Everybody at Ironwood knew Lottie. They knew she couldn't bake to save her life when she first arrived. They knew she talked fancy. They knew the boss watched over her like a hawk. Haven't seen anyone like that, the bartender grunted, pushing the paper back. Only girls around here are the ones working upstairs, and they ain't wearing pearls. Silas nodded. He didn't look disappointed. He just folded the paper, put it back in his pocket, and drank his whiskey. Tommy didn't wait. He dropped a nickel on the counter. He slipped out the back door. He hit the alley running. He found his horse tied to the hitching post. He scrambled into the saddle, kicked his spurs, and rode hard out of town. He rode like the devil himself was chasing him. The afternoon sun was brutal at Ironwood. Elias was in the barn. He had his sleeves rolled up, filing down the roughest edge of a horse's hoof. The rhythmic scrape of the metal file filled the quiet space. Hoofbeats drummed into the yard, fast and reckless. Elias stopped filing. He set the horse's leg down gently. He walked out into the glaring sunlight. Tommy pulled back hard on the reins. The horse reared slightly, kicking up a cloud of red dust. Tommy practically fell out of the saddle. He was panting, his face pale under the dirt. "Boss?" Tommy gasped. He leaned against his horse, catching his breath. "Boss, trouble!" Elias didn't rush. He walked over. He handed Tommy a canteen from the fence post. "Drink first, talk second." Tommy took a gulp of water. He coughed. Then he looked Elias in the eye. "There's a man in town," Tommy said, "at the brass ring. Wears a gray coat. Got a picture on a piece of paper. He's asking around for a girl, Eastern girl. Says she might be playing a maid." Elias's jaw tightened. A muscle twitched in his cheek. "Did he give a name?" Elias asked. The bartender called him Mister. But I saw the handle of his pistol when he leaned over the bar. Had an ivory grip with a star carved in it. Elias closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He knew that gun. He had carved that star himself, 10 years ago, around a campfire outside of Gettysburg. "Silas?" Elias muttered. "You know him, boss?" "He's my cousin," Elias said. The words tasted like ash. "He's a private detective out of Dallas." Tommy swallowed hard. "He's looking for Lottie, ain't he?" "Yes," Elias handed the canteen back. "Don't say a word to the other men. Go untack your horse. Then get up to the main house and stand on the porch. Don't let anyone but me inside." Tommy nodded, his young face setting into a grim line. "Yes, sir." Elias turned and walked toward the house. His boots hit the dirt with heavy, measured thuds. He found Lottie in the parlor. She was dusting the bookshelves. Afternoon light caught the dust motes dancing in the air. She looked peaceful, grounded. The frantic, terrified girl who had arrived a month ago was gone. Elias hated what he had to do next. He had to bring the terror back. "Lottie," he said softly. She turned. She smiled. It was a real smile, reaching all the way to her eyes. "You're done in the barn early. Sit down," Elias said. The smile vanished. She saw the look on his face, the rigid set of his shoulders. She set the feather duster on a table and sat on the edge of the sofa. Her hands gripped her apron. "What's wrong?" she asked. "There's a man in Caldwell," Elias said. He kept his voice steady, level. "He needed to be her anchor right now. He's a private detective. He's showing your picture around." Lottie went completely white. She looked like she might faint. "Cornelius," she whispered. "Cornelius found me." He didn't find you. He hired a hound and sniff you out. But the hound hasn't caught the scent yet. If he's in town, he will. It's only a matter of time. Her chest heaved. Panic was rising fast. I have to pack. I have to leave. If I catch the night train out of Elias across the room. He took hold of her shoulders. Firm, but gentle. You aren't going anywhere, Elias said. Ilias, you don't understand what Cornelius will do. He has lawyers. He has judges in his pocket. He'll ruin you for hiding me. Let him try, Elias said. His dark eyes locked onto hers. You aren't running anymore, Lottie. Not from him. Not from anyone. You belong to yourself now. I told you that you have a place here. I meant it. But the detective, I'll handle the detective, Elias said. He's my cousin. Lottie stared at him. The shock pushed the panic down for a second. Your cousin? His name is Silas. We fought in the war together. I know how he thinks. I know how he operates. Elias let go of her shoulders. He picked up his hat from a chair. Stay inside. Tommy is watching the door. I'm going to town. Elias, please be careful. If he's working for Cornelius, he's dangerous. So am I, Elias said quietly. He put his hat on, pulling the brim low over his eyes. I'll be back before sundown. The brass ring was mostly empty at 2 in the afternoon. Silas Thorne sat at a corner table. He had his back to the wall. An empty whiskey glass sat in front of him. He was shuffling a deck of cards, waiting for the evening crowd. The saloon doors swung open. A tall shadow fell across the sawdust floor. Silas looked up. He stopped shuffling. The cards went still in his hands. Elias walked slowly across the room. The spurs on his boots jingled faintly. The sound was sharp in the quiet bar. He didn't look at the bartender. He didn't look at the empty tables. He looked straight at Silas. Elias pulled out a chair opposite his cousin. He sat down. Silas let out a slow breath. A crooked smile touched the corner of his mouth. Well, I'll be damned. The hermit of Ironwood Ranch. Good to see you, Elias. It's been, what? 3 years? 4, Elias said. His voice was flat, cold. Silas's smile faded. He recognized that tone. It was the tone Elias used right before an ambush. You're a long way from Dallas, Elias said. Working a case, Silas replied, leaning back in his chair. A lucrative one, as a matter of fact. Eastern money. You know how they throw it around. I know. Elias leaned his forearms on the table. I know exactly who is throwing it. Cornelius Vance. Silas narrowed his eyes. He slowly pushed the deck of cards aside. How do you know that name? Because the girl you're hunting is living in my house, Elias said. Silence dropped over the table like a heavy woolen blanket. Silas stared at his cousin. His mind worked fast, connecting the dots. She's at Ironwood? Under your roof? Silas let out a dry chuckle. Well, that saves me a week of asking questions. Tell her to pack a bag. We're going to the depot. Elias didn't blink. She isn't going anywhere. Elias, don't be a fool, Silas said. His voice dropped. He leaned in closer. Do you know how much Vance is paying me? $500 for one girl. Just to put her on a train back to New York. I'll split it with you. $250 each. That'll buy a lot of feed for your cattle. Elias looked at Silas. He looked at the man he had shared canteens with. The man he had pulled out of a trench in Virginia. It broke his heart to see what the world had done to him. I don't want his money, Elias said. Then just step aside, Silas argued, getting frustrated. It's just business, Elias. I'm a detective. This is my job. A client pays me to find a missing asset. I find it. Elias's fist slammed down on the table. The wood cracked. The empty whiskey glass jumped and shattered on the floor. The bartender at the other end of the room jumped, then quickly made himself scarce. Silas stiffened, his hand hovering near his coat pocket. Elias leaned forward. His face was inches from his cousin's. His dark eyes burned with a fierce, unwavering fire. Listen to yourself, hissed. The words were perfectly clear, rhythmic, brutal. Listen to the words coming out of your mouth. An asset. You're talking about a human being, Silas. You're talking about a woman. She's bound by a contract signed by men who want to trade her life for dirt. Elias cut him off. His voice grew louder, filling the empty room. It wasn't just anger. It was a profound, unshakable conviction. Being loyal to a paycheck while trampling on a woman's freedom isn't a profession, Silas, Elias stated, driving every word home like a nail into wood. It is extortion, plain and simple. Silas swallowed hard. He tried to look away, but Elias' gaze pinned him to the chair. We as men, Elias continued, his voice ringing with absolute clarity, have no right to dictate a woman's destiny. God gave her a mind. God gave her a soul. No piece of paper from New York gives Cornelius Vance the right to own her, and no amount of silver gives you the right to be his bloodhound. Elias, I need the money. Money doesn't buy back your soul, Elias interrupted. He pointed a calloused finger directly at Silas's chest. If you hunt her down right now, if you drag her out of my house and hand her over to that tycoon, you are nothing but an accomplice to a modern-day slave trade. The words echoed in the dusty saloon. Slave trade. Silas flinched. The color drained from his face. Elias didn't let up. He leaned back slightly, but his gaze remained fierce. You wore a blue uniform in the war, Silas, Elias said softly. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, mourning sadness. You marched for 1,000 miles to free people who were bought and sold. Do not sit here today and put chains on a woman just because the buyer wears a silk suit. Silas stared at his cousin. He looked at his own hands, the hands that had held a rifle for freedom, the hands that were now reaching for $500 in blood money. The silence stretched. It felt like an hour. Slowly, Silas reached into his coat pocket. He didn't pull out the pistol with the carved star. He pulled out the folded piece of paper. The sketch of Charlotte Montgomery. He looked at the picture. Then he looked at Elias. She's safe with you? Silas asked quietly. Nobody will ever put a hand on her as long as I draw breath. Elias swore. Silas nodded. He struck a match against the table. He touched the flame to the edge of the wanted poster. The paper caught fire. The flame crept up, turning the haughty girl in the pearls to black ash. Silas dropped the burning paper into an empty brass spittoon. It curled up and died. The trail went cold, Silas said. His voice was hollow, but lighter. The heavy weight of the dirty money was gone. I followed a lead to Caldwell, but it was a dead end. I'm taking the stagecoach back to Dallas tonight. Elias let out a slow breath. He reached across the table. He gripped Silas's shoulder and gave it a hard, firm squeeze. Use your conscience as a man, cousin, Elias said softly. It's the only thing you take with you to the grave. Silas nodded. He stood up. He adjusted his coat, picked up his hat, and walked out the swinging doors into the bright Texas sun. Elias sat alone at the table for a long minute. He looked at the ashes in the spittoon. He had won the battle. Silas was gone. But Elias knew the war was just beginning. Cornelius Vance wasn't a man who accepted failure. When Silas didn't return with his prize, Vance wouldn't send another hound. He would come himself. Elias stood up. He walked out to his horse. He swung into the saddle and pointed his horse toward Ironwood. The storm was coming, and they were going to hold the line. The mail came to Ironwood once a week. Usually it was just seed catalogs, bills of sale, maybe a newspaper from Dallas. Today was different. Elias sat at his desk. A single envelope lay on the scarred wood. It didn't belong in Texas. It was thick, cream-colored parchment. It carried the faint, powdery scent of a New York parlor. The wax seal on the back was stamped with a heavy cursive, M. Montgomery. Elias picked it up. It felt heavy, like holding a loaded gun. He slid his thumb under the flap and broke the wax. He pulled out 2 sheets of paper. The handwriting was tight, desperate. A man gripping a pen so hard his knuckles were probably white. Elias began to read. To the unknown man of the river 7 years ago, on a freezing November night, I fell from the docks of the Hudson. I was a fool. I was drunk on my own arrogance. I was drowning. You pulled me out. You dragged me the cobblestones. You didn't ask for my name. You didn't wait for a reward. You saved my life and walked away into the dark. I spent years looking for you. I hired men to find the cowboy who pulled me from the ice. It took 5 years, but they found your name. Elias Thorne, Ironwood Ranch, Texas. I never wrote. I am a proud man. Too proud. But God is punishing my pride. My daughter Charlotte has run away. She is gone, and it is my fault. I tried to sell her in a marriage to a monster named Cornelius Vance. I was blackmailed. Vance threatened to ruin my company, to leave us penniless. I thought I was saving her by sacrificing her freedom. I was a coward. I have reason to believe she took a train west. Vance has sent hounds after her. I am surrounded by Vance's men in my own home. I cannot leave New York without him knowing. Mr. Thorne, I owe you my life. I am calling in that debt, not for me, for my little girl. If she is in your territory, if you hear of a girl with dark hair and a stubborn chin, please find her, protect her from Vance. Tell her her father is sorry. Tell her I would rather burn my empire to the ground than see her locked in Vance's cage. Yours in debt, Arthur Montgomery. Elias stared at the signature. The silence in the study was absolute. The clock on the mantel ticked. Tick, tick, tick. Elias closed his eyes. He remembered the cold water of the Hudson. He remembered hauling the heavy, choking man onto the wet wood of the docks. He remembered the man's expensive wool coat soaked with freezing water. Arthur Montgomery, the man who had tried to sell Lottie to a tyrant, was the same man Elias had pulled from the river. The world wasn't just small. It was a cruel, beautiful, tangled web. Elias stood up. He left the letter on the desk. He walked out of the study, down the hall, and out the back door. The wind is picking up. The air was turning crisp. Winter was whispering over the plains. He found Lottie in the barn. She was brushing down a big roan gelding. Her strokes were long, even, patient. She was humming softly. The horse leaned into her touch, its eyes half closed. She looked at home. She looked strong. Elias leaned against the wooden stall. He just watched her for a minute. He didn't want to break the peace. But the peace was a lie. Lottie, he said. She stopped brushing. She turned around. The smile on her face faded when she saw his eyes. What is it? She asked. She set the brush down. She wiped her hands on her apron. Is it Silas? Did he come back? No, Elias said. Silas is gone. Then what? Come with me to the house, Elias said. There's something you need to read. Lottie followed him. She didn't ask questions. She just walked beside him, her steps matching his. They went into the study. Elias closed the door. He walked behind the desk. He picked up the letter. He held it out to her. It came in the mail today, Elias said. It's from New York. Lottie recoiled. She took a step back, as if the paper was a rattlesnake. If it's from Cornelius, it's not from Cornelius, Elias interrupted gently. It's from your father. Lottie froze. She stared at the letter. Her breathing turned shallow. Why is my father writing to you? She whispered. Read it, Elias said. He kept his hand extended. Take it, Lottie. Read it. Slowly, her hand came up. Her fingers trembled. She took the thick paper. She recognized the handwriting immediately. She sank into the leather chair opposite the desk. She began to read. Elias watched her face. He saw the exact moment she read about the river. Her brow furrowed. He saw the moment she read about the blackmail. Her eyes widened. And he saw the moment she read the apology. A single tear spilled over her eyelashes. It dropped onto the parchment. Then another, and another. She covered her mouth with her hand. A quiet, broken sob tore from her throat. Elias walked around the desk. He didn't hover. He crouched down beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. He waited. Lottie lowered the letter. Her hands were shaking violently. She looked at Elias through blurry, tear-filled eyes. "You saved him," she whispered. "7 years ago. You saved his life." "I pulled a man out of the water," Elias said softly. "I didn't know who he was." "He was blackmailed," Lottie choked out. "He didn't just want to sell me for profit. He was trapped. Cornelius was going to destroy him. And he's sorry, say. He told you to protect me." She looked down at the letter again. The anger she had carried for a month, the hot, bright rage that had fueled her escape, suddenly crumpled. Underneath the anger was just a terrible, aching sadness. "I hated him," Lottie wept. "I hated him so much for what he did to me." Elias reached out. He took her shaking hands in his large, calloused ones. He held them firmly, grounding her. "Look at me," Elias said. Lottie lifted her tear-streaked face. Elias spoke clearly. Every word carried the weight of a man who had seen too much pain. "Family trauma thrives in silence, Lottie," Elias said. "Healing doesn't start with forgetting mistakes. It starts with bravely acknowledging each other's pain. Your father was wrong to treat you as a pawn. He was a coward to hide the truth from you. But he is trying to make it right. He is risking his own ruin right now to try and save you." Lottie squeezed his hands. "But what do I do? How do I forgive him for putting me in that cage?" "Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip," Elias stated, his voice steady and educational. "It is a daily choice, but you can't make that choice if you refuse to communicate. True healing requires honesty. He has finally told you the truth. Now you hold the power to decide what to do with it." Lottie nodded slowly. The tears slowed. The panic faded. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a woman holding the truth in her hands. Elias let go of her hands. He stood up. He walked over to the fireplace. He stared into the flames for a long time. Then he turned around. "Cornelius Vance will figure out where you are," Elias said. The softness was gone. The boss of Ironwood was back. Silas might have walked away, but Vance is not a man who lets a prized asset go. He will come here. He will bring the law. He will bring guns. Lottie stood up. She wiped her eyes. She lifted her chin. "I know," she said. "I can hide you," Elias offered. "I know caves in the canyons. I know trails the law has never seen. I can put you on a horse tonight, give you money, and you can disappear into Mexico. You will be completely free." Lottie looked at the tall, stoic man. She looked at his dark eyes. She thought about the stars he had showed her. She thought about the burnt biscuits he had eaten. She thought about the respect he had handed her every single day. "I'm done running," Lottie said. Elias went very still. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "This is my home. If Cornelius Vance wants me, he can come look me in the eye. But I am not leaving." Elias stared at her. A slow, profound respect settled over his face. He walked back toward her. He stopped right in front of her. He took off his hat. "Then let him come," Elias said. His voice was low, rough. "But if you stay, you don't stay as a maid, and you don't stay as a runaway." He reached out. He touched her cheek. His thumb brushed away a stray tear. "I am not a man of fancy words," Elias said, his eyes burning into hers. I own a ranch with a mortgage. I have 8 men who rely on me. I have dirt under my nails. I cannot offer you New York. I cannot offer you ballrooms. Lottie stepped into his touch. I don't want ballrooms. I don't want to own you, Elias continued. He spoke the words like a vow. I don't want a wife to sit by the fire and look pretty. I want a partner, an equal. I want a woman who can stand her ground when the wolves come to the door. I want you. Lottie's heart hammered in her chest, not out of fear, out of pure, absolute joy. Ask me, Elias, she whispered. Elias looked down at her. Stay with me, marry me. Fight for this land with me. Lottie smiled. It was the brightest, fiercest smile of her life. Yes, she said. Elias didn't hesitate. He pulled her against him. He kissed her. It wasn't a polite parlor kiss. It was hard, real, filled with dirt and sweat and promises that wouldn't break. The storm was coming. Cornelius Vance was on his way. But as Elias held her in his arms, Lottie knew one thing for certain. They were ready. The sickness hit her 3 days later. Lottie woke up before dawn. The room spun. Her stomach heaved violently. She scrambled out of her narrow bed, grabbed the chamber pot, and threw up everything she had eaten the night before. She sat on the cold wooden floor, gasping for air. Her forehead rested against the edge of the bed. She was trembling. A soft knock came at the door. Charlotte? It was Beatrice. Her voice was hushed. Come in, Lottie croaked. The door creaked open. Beatrice stepped inside, holding candle. The flickering light caught the older woman's face. She looked down at Lottie. She looked at the chamber pot. Beatrice set the candle down. She poured a glass of water from the pitcher. She knelt on the floor and handed it to Lottie. Drink, Beatrice said softly. Lottie took a sip. She rinsed her mouth. She felt exhausted. I must have eaten something bad. The stew last night. Beatrice didn't say anything. She just reached out and placed a cool hand on Lottie's forehead. No fever. Then Beatrice looked down at Lottie's stomach. Charlotte, Beatrice said. Her tone was gentle, but heavy with meaning. When was your last cycle? Lottie froze. The glass in her hand stopped halfway to her mouth. She thought back. The weeks had blurred together. The exhaustion of the ranch, the fear of discovery, the growing love for Elias. She had lost track of time. It had been over 2 months. Lottie lowered the glass. She looked at Beatrice. Her eyes went wide. Oh, dear God, Lottie whispered. It's Elias's, Beatrice asked. It wasn't an accusation, just a question of fact. Lottie nodded slowly. Her hand moved down to rest flat against her stomach. A baby. She was carrying Elias's child. A child conceived in love, not a transaction. A child of Texas dirt and endless stars. Suddenly, the stakes shifted. They didn't just rise, they exploded. If Cornelius Vance dragged her back to New York now, he wouldn't just take her freedom. He would take her child. He would raise Elias's baby as a prisoner of his own empire, or worse, he would dispose of it. Lottie gripped Beatrice's arm. Her fingers dug into the older woman's sleeve. Beatrice, Lottie said, her voice fierce. Panic was gone. Pure, maternal survival took its place. He cannot take me back. Do you understand? I will die before I let that man put me on a train. Beatrice covered Lottie's hand. You won't die, child, and you won't go back. Not as long as the men on this ranch have breath in their lungs. Lottie stood up. She wasn't dizzy anymore. She felt like iron. I need to tell Elias, she said. She washed her face. She pulled on her gray dress. She walked out of her room and down the hall. Before she reached the study, she heard it, shouting, out in the yard. Then, the sharp, unmistakable crack of a rifle firing a warning shot into the air. Lottie ran. She threw open the front door and rushed onto the wide porch. The morning sun was just breaking over the horizon. casting long, bloody shadows across the dirt. 4 black buggies were parked in the center of the yard. Dust swirled around the wheels. Horses stamped and snorted. 10 men had climbed out of the buggies. They weren't cowboys. They wore tailored suits and bowler hats, but their coats were pushed back, revealing heavy revolvers strapped to their waists. Hired guns. Pinkertons. Thugs in expensive clothes. And standing in front of them, leaning on a silver-tipped walking stick, was Cornelius Vance. He looked exactly as Lottie remembered. Cold, calculated. A spider inspecting his web. Standing opposite the buggies was Elias. He didn't have a coat on. His Winchester rifle was in his hands, aimed loosely at the dirt, but ready to swing up in a fraction of a second. Behind Elias stood Tommy, Hector, and the rest of the Ironwood crew. 8 cowboys. 8 worn rifles. "Mr. Thorne, I presume," Cornelius Vance said. His voice carried across the yard, smooth and arrogant. "You have something that belongs to me. Nothing on this land belongs to you, mister," Elias replied. His voice was a low rumble. "Dangerous." Vance smiled thinly. He reached into his coat. The cowboys raised their rifles an inch. Vance slowly pulled out a folded legal document. "I hold here an arrest warrant from the state of New York, signed by a federal judge," Vance declared loudly, "and a writ of guardianship. Charlotte Montgomery is my legal fiancée. She is mentally unfit. She is a runaway, and by law, she is to be remanded into my custody immediately." Lottie stepped off the porch. "I am not unfit," she yelled. Every head turned. Lottie walked out into the open dirt. She didn't hide behind Elias. She walked right up beside him. She stood shoulder to shoulder with the man she loved. Cornelius looked at her. He took in her chopped hair, her plain gray dress, her calloused hands. His lip curled in disgust. "Look at you," Vance sneered, "playing in the mud with cattle hands. You are a disgrace to your father's name. Get your things, Charlotte. We are leaving." "I am not going anywhere with you, Cornelius," Lottie said. Her voice didn't shake. It rang clear as a bell in the morning air. Vance's eyes narrowed. "You don't have a choice. I have the paper. I have the men. You are legally bound to me. That contract is a forgery." Another voice, desperate, hoarse. A 5th buggy tore into the yard. It had been driven so hard the horse was lathered in white sweat. The buggy skidded to a halt. A man practically threw himself out of the driver's seat. He was older. His suit was covered in trailer dust. He looked exhausted, sick, and terrified. It was Arthur Montgomery. Lottie gasped. "Father?" Arthur stumbled forward. He placed himself squarely between Cornelius Vance and Lottie. Vance looked shocked, then furious. "Arthur, what the hell are you doing here? You were supposed to stay in New York." "I'm done taking your orders, Cornelius," Arthur wheezed. He turned his head and looked at Lottie. His eyes filled with tears. He looked at her chopped hair, her rough clothes, and the tall, armed cowboy standing beside her. "I'm sorry, Lottie," Arthur whispered. "I'm so sorry." Arthur turned back to face Vance. He stood tall. "The marriage contract is void," Arthur shouted, "and the land deeds are void. I brought my own lawyers to the federal judge in Dallas yesterday. I told them about the blackmail. I told them you forged her signature." Vance's face went purple with rage. "You stupid old fool. You just ruined yourself. I'll bankrupt your entire company by Tuesday." "Then let it burn," Arthur roared back. He threw his arms out wide, shielding Lottie with his own body. Arthur looked at Vance's hired guns. He spoke with the absolute clarity of a man who had finally found his soul. "No human being is property," Arthur declared, his voice echoing off the sandstone walls of the ranch. "I was wrong to try and force her life. I treated my own daughter like a commodity, but I will use my last breath to protect her right to own her own life now. She stays here. Vance drew a silver-plated pistol from his coat. Instantly, Elias raised his Winchester. 9 cowboy rifles clicked back their hammers. The sound was deafening. Vance's hired guns drew their weapons, but they hesitated. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and they were looking at men who shot wolves for a living. "She is mine," Vance screamed, pointing the pistol at Arthur. "She is my legal property by contract. I paid for her." Lottie didn't cower. She didn't let her father fight her battle. She stepped around her father. She walked forward until she was only 10 feet away from the barrel of Vance's gun. Elias stepped right beside her. He didn't pull her back. He stood with her, equal. Lottie looked dead into Cornelius Vance's eyes. She placed her hand flat against her stomach. "Listen to me, Cornelius," Lottie said. She spoke slowly. Every word was a hammer blow to the chains of her past. "My body, my mind, and the future of the child I carry belong entirely to me." Vance flinched. The hired guns exchanged uneasy looks. "A woman's human rights," Lottie stated, projecting her voice so every man in the yard could hear, "cannot be bought, sold, or traded with any forged piece of paper. I am not an asset. I am a free woman. And if you want to take me from this land, you will have to kill every man standing behind me." Silence fell over Ironwood. Heavy, absolute silence. Vance looked at Lottie. He looked at the fierce, unwavering light in her eyes. He looked at Elias Thorne, whose finger was steady on the trigger. He looked at the 8 cowboys who had their sights aimed at his chest. Vance's hand shook. He slowly lowered the pistol. "You're a whore," Vance spat, "and you're dead to New York." "I am alive in Texas," Lottie replied coldly. "Get off our land," Vance sneered. He turned around. He waved his hand at his men. They holstered their guns. They climbed back into their buggies. Vance didn't look back. He snapped the reins, and the buggies rolled out of the yard, kicking up a cloud of red dust. They were gone. The fight was over. Lottie stood in the dirt. Her knees suddenly felt weak. She swayed. Elias dropped his rifle. He caught her before she fell. He pulled her tight against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, breathing heavily. "You did it," Elias whispered. "You stood your ground." Lottie looked over Elias's shoulder. Arthur Montgomery was standing in the dirt, his shoulders shaking. He looked old, broken. Lottie gently pulled back from Elias. She walked over to her father. Arthur looked up at her. He didn't try to touch her. He just looked at the daughter he had almost destroyed and the woman she had become. "Are you really with child?" Arthur asked softly. Lottie nodded. Arthur closed his eyes. A tear slipped down his weathered cheek. "Then he will be born free. Thank God for that." Lottie reached out. She took her father's hand. It was soft, cold, but it was holding hers. "Come inside, Father," Lottie said quietly. "Beatrice is making coffee." Arthur opened his eyes. He looked at her in wonder. He nodded slowly. Lottie turned back to Elias. The cowboy boss stood in the dirt, the morning sun catching the gold in his eyes. He smiled at her, a smile of profound, absolute respect. The cage was broken. The sky was open. They were free. The dust settled. The law moved fast. It took exactly 8 days for the telegram to arrive from Dallas. Thorne had kept his word. He took the evidence to a federal judge. The ledgers, the forged signatures, the illegal land deeds. Cornelius Vance didn't even make it back to New York. The marshals pulled him off a luxury rail car in Missouri. He was in irons. The threat was gone. The shadow lifted. At Ironwood Ranch, the days grew shorter. The Texas autumn turned cold. Arthur Montgomery stayed for a week. He slept in the spare room. He didn't complain about the hard mattress. He didn't complain about the simple food. He watched the cowboys work. He watched Elias run his ranch with a quiet, steady fairness. Most of all, he watched his daughter. He saw Lottie carry water. He saw her build a fire. He saw the rough calluses on her hands. On Arthur's last evening, before taking the train east, he sat on the back porch. The sun was sinking, painting the sky in bruised purple and dark orange. Lottie walked out. She handed him a tin cup of black coffee. She sat down beside him on the wooden steps. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just listened to the wind. "I leave tomorrow," Arthur said quietly. "I know," Lottie replied. Arthur held the tin cup with both hands. Heat seeped deep into his palms. He looked over at his daughter. He looked at the chopped hair, now growing out, framing her face in soft waves. "I owe you an apology," Arthur said. "A real one, not just for Vance, but for everything before him." Lottie looked at her hands. "Father, you don't have to." "I do," Arthur interrupted gently. "I need to say it out loud." He set the coffee down. He turned his body to face her. "I thought a woman was a fragile thing," Arthur said, his voice thick with regret. "I was raised to believe that a woman needed a wealthy man to protect her from the world. I thought I was doing right by you, but that kind of protection is just a polite word for control. It is tyranny dressed up in fine clothes." Lottie looked up. She met her father's eyes. They were wet. "A father's duty isn't to trade his daughter for security," Arthur stated firmly. The truth finally clear to him. A father's duty is to raise her to own her own mind, her own property, and her own future. You are a human being, Charlotte, not a bargaining chip, and you proved that you have more strength in your two hands than I ever had in my whole empire. I am so deeply proud of the woman you built yourself to be." Lottie's throat tightened. The last lingering ache in her chest dissolved. She reached out. She hugged her father. It was the first real, honest embrace they had shared since she was a little girl. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "I forgive you, truly." Arthur left the next morning. He left a changed man. He went back to New York to sell his mansion, pay off his honest debts, and live a quiet life. 3 months later, winter in Texas was a bright, cold thing. The sky was an endless pale blue. The frost crunched under heavy leather boots. It was wedding day. There was no cathedral. There was no imported silk. There were no reporters from the society papers. The ceremony was in the front yard of Ironwood Ranch, right under the massive oak tree. Beatrice had made the dress. It was cream-colored cotton, simple, elegant. It moved beautifully when the wind blew. There was no suffocating corset underneath. Lottie could breathe. She felt light. Tommy and the rest of the Ironwood Cowboys had scrubbed themselves raw. They wore their best Sunday shirts. They stood in a neat line, hats in their hands, grinning from ear to ear. Silas Thorne was there, too. He had ridden down from Dallas. He stood near the back, a quiet smile on his face. The town reverend stood under the tree. He opened his worn leather Bible. Ella stood waiting. He wore a dark wool suit, but he still looked like the land. Unshakable, deep. He watched Lottie walk out onto the porch. He watched her walk down the steps. He watched her walk toward him. He didn't take his eyes off her for a single second. Lottie reached him. She took his hands. They were warm, rough, familiar. The Reverend cleared his throat. He began the ceremony. He read the scriptures. He spoke about the harshness of the frontier and the comfort of companionship. Then he got to the vows. The Reverend looked at Lottie. "Do you, Charlotte, take this man," the Reverend read, "to love, to cherish, and to obey, so long as you both shall live?" "Hold on, Reverend," Elias said. His voice was calm, but it stopped the ceremony dead. The cowboys shifted. Beatrice put a hand to her mouth. The Reverend blinked, looking up from his book. Excuse me, Mr. Thorne? The Reverend asked. Elias didn't look at the preacher. He looked entirely at Lottie. Skip that word, Elias said. Obey, we don't use that word on this land. The Reverend looked flustered. It is the traditional vow, son. It is how it has always been done. Then today, we do it differently, Elias said. He let go of Lottie's hands. He stepped back just an inch. He wanted everyone to hear this. He needed the world to hear this. I won't have my wife swear to obey me like a hired hand, Elias declared. His voice was strong, carrying easily on the cold winter wind. Every word was a hammer driving a nail into the coffin of the old world. Elias looked deeply into Lottie's eyes. I, Elias, he said, speaking his own vow from the heart, do not choose you to shelter you as a weaker vessel, nor do I take you to possess you as property. I choose you as my equal partner. I will share in your triumphs and your burdens. I give you my absolute respect for your free and independent soul. The yard was dead silent. Even the wind seemed to stop to listen. Lottie felt tears prick her eyes. They were tears of pure, unfiltered joy. This was the man she had run 1,400 miles to find. A man who understood the value of freedom. She stepped forward. She took his hands back. She spoke loud and clear. I, Lottie, she said, leaving the ghost of Charlotte Montgomery behind forever, choose you as my equal partner. I will ride beside you. I will build this life with you. My heart belongs to you because my life belongs to me. Elias smiled, a real, wide, beautiful smile. The Reverend cleared his throat again. He looked a little pale, but he nodded. Very well. By the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Elias pulled her in. He kissed her. The cowboys erupted. Tommy threw his hat in the air. Hector let out a loud, rolling cheer. Beatrice wept openly into her handkerchief. It was loud. It was messy. It was perfect. 1 year later, autumn, 1879, the air smelled of wood smoke, dried grass, and roasted coffee. Lottie sat on the top step of the back porch. The sun was low, turning the red dirt to gold. She wasn't alone. She held a baby boy in her arms. Little William. He had a shock of dark hair and eyes the color of dark coffee. He was 4 months old, healthy and heavy. He was currently asleep, his tiny fist gripping the fabric of her apron. Lottie looked down at him. She smoothed the hair back from his forehead. She looked at her own hand as she did it. The calluses were still there. They would always be there. She still hauled water. She still baked bread. She still helped with the foals in the spring. She wouldn't trade those calluses for all the gold in New York. Footsteps sounded in the dirt. Heavy. Rhythmic. Elias walked around the corner of the house. He had a coil of rope over his shoulder. His hat was pushed back. He looked tired, but it was a good tired. The kind of tired a man feels when he is building something that will last. He saw Lottie on the steps. He stopped. He dropped the rope. He walked over. He sat down on the step right beside her. He wrapped a thick, strong arm around her waist and pulled her close. He leaned over and pressed a soft kiss to the baby's head. He's finally asleep, Elias whispered. Don't wake him, Lottie whispered back, leaning her head on Elias's shoulder. Or you're walking the floor with him tonight. Elias chuckled quietly. The sound rumbled against her side. They sat in silence. They watched the suns slip behind the distant canyons. The sky exploded in color. Purple, pink, deep, burning orange. I got a letter from your father today, Elias said softly. He bought a small house near the coast. Says he has an extra room. Wants to know when we are bringing his grandson to see the ocean. Lottie smiled. Maybe next spring, when the weather turns. Maybe, Elias agreed. He reached down. He took her rough, calloused hand in his. He interlaced their fingers. Lottie squeezed his hand. She looked out at the rolling acres of Ironwood Ranch. She looked at the sturdy stone house behind them. She looked at the man beside her and the child in her arms. She had run away with nothing but $12 and a stolen dress. She had been terrified. She had been alone, but she had chosen to survive. She had chosen to work. She had chosen to fight for the right to own her own life. She wasn't a runaway heiress anymore. She wasn't a maid in disguise. She was a mother. She was a wife. She was an equal. She was Lottie Thorne. And as the first stars began to prick through the fading Texas light, she knew exactly where she was. She didn't need to look for the North Star. She wasn't lost anymore. She was home.
As the dust settles on the Texas plains and the stars rise over Ironwood Ranch, Lottie Mae Carter stands not as a runaway heiress, not as a maid, but as a woman who has claimed her own life. Her journey reminds us that freedom is not given. It is fought for, earned, and sometimes carried quietly in the courage to face our fears. Through the heat of the sun, the blistered hands, the burned biscuits, and the weight of responsibility, she learned that strength is found not in wealth, status, or appearances, but in resilience, honesty, and the willingness to stand for oneself, even when the world doubts you. Elias Thorne's guidance shows that respect and trust are the true foundations of love, and that supporting someone's growth is far more powerful than controlling them. This story holds a mirror to our own lives, teaching us that our worth is not measured by what others think we should be, but by the integrity with which we live, the compassion we extend, and the courage we summon when the stakes are highest. It speaks to the power of human connection, the way guidance, empathy, and patience can transform fear into empowerment, grief into hope, and oppression into autonomy. It is a testament to the quiet strength of those who labor, those who nurture, and those who fight for justice in small, steady acts every day. Ultimately, Lottie's tale is about redemption, resilience, and the triumph of the human spirit over cruelty, injustice, and fear. It reminds us that even in a harsh, unyielding world, there is room for love that uplifts, guidance that empowers, and freedom that restores the soul. And it challenges each of us to ask, how do we treat those whose hands bear the marks of hard work, whose hearts carry the weight of betrayal, or whose voices have long been silenced? By offering respect, compassion, and understanding, we honor the strength that already exists within them, and perhaps within ourselves. If this journey through the western frontier, through struggle, love, and redemption, has moved you, remember that every story of courage carries a lesson. Stand tall, value yourself, and lift others as you rise. On this channel, we celebrate the spirit of the American West, the bonds of family, the power of love, and the enduring strength of human kindness. Let Lottie's courage inspire you. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to join us in discovering more tales of resilience, hope, and compassion on the wide open plains.